All right, welcome. This is my presentation on common wrist injuries. So sorry if the audio is a little bad. Doing this um, with not proper stuff, but we are going to be talking about a wrist injury, common wrist injuries. And follow along with your study guide because it should be pretty straightforward with the study guide. If it's not, then you'll find the answers at some point in this whole entire section. Now, moving on to the next slide. So, types of common wrist injuries are the colon fractures, the Smith fractures, and the carpal tunnel syndrome. As we can see here, we carpal tunnel syndrome is more of a common in every situation, and as we're going to learn further down, that they're all these common injuries are connected to each other in some sort of way. So the colon's fracture and the causes. So it's a distal radial fracture. So that means falling on an overextended arm or wrist. It's overextended, so it's like laid flat. And we're gonna go back to this picture. So on the bottom left corner, you're gonna see two hands in two different directions. The one on the left is the colon fracture. You can see how it's broken and fractured like that on the overextended wrist, with it being it being extended, not flexed. But you can see how it's broken right there. But how that risk could happen is in any falls, car accidents, any contact sports, space or football, soccer, any contact sport in any of those natures. Moving on to the treatment for this. So they will come up with multiple there is multiple treatments out there that you can do for this fracture. Um, like any other fracture, like any other broken bones fracture, you would need a splint or a cast just to kind of hold it in place and let that bone heal up on itself. And then after that, you would go into physical therapy to kind of get the strength back in that, as we can see in this picture. Um, and then that moves into the next of rehabilitation. So when you go into physical therapy, they're going to have you do wrist flexions and extensions and then finger stretches because of that broken bone. There could be muscles that also could have been a factor in that, or could also be affected in the fracture. So they just kind of straighten in the fingers because all the muscles connected from the wrist or are connected throughout your entire hand. So it's the flexion, finger stretching, extension, that kind of ordeal. Now there is a thing if it does get like super serious where it's a very clean break, it's not going to be helped in any sort of way, so they have to do that reinforcement. So they'll put in screws, and you'll have to go into surgery and they'll put in screws like that plate at the top right corner. That's how it would at least somewhat look. And then after that, you would have a cast, and um, go into physical therapy to work all that, and they would put you through the same finger stretches, finger flexion, extension, all that ordeal on that treatment. Now moving on to the Smith's fracture. So that is the opposite of the Collins fracture. So they call it the reverse Collins fracture because it's a flexion of the fracture of the distal radius. So that could be falling on that flexed wrist or blown to the back of the wrist. Any type of blow to the back of the wrist, any type of damage that can cause. That's also contact sports, car accidents, falls, any ordeal that could cause that wrist to fracture. Sorry if my screen keeps going black. I'm kind of trying to work on that as well. Um, but getting back to the whole entire presentation, so there is a lot of causes that come to this fracture, this common injury that we have. But there is only a set few treatments because there's not much they could do. It's the exact same treatments as Collins fracture, but there is so there's no difference. There's no nothing around that. So with that cast splint, um, physical therapy, rehabilitation, it's not common to have surgery with this fracture, but it's not impossible to have surgery with this fracture. So there's a lot of issues that could happen with that. So leaning on to that whole entire thing. Now I'll let you. I'll pause for a sec for you guys to get that information down. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of show you. We're gonna go back to this slide on showing you how the Smith's fracture kind of looks. So the same picture down at the bottom left is the right picture. So that radius is broken, flexed wrist. I mean, it's kind of slightly. It looks slightly less worse than the Collins fracture because the Collins fracture will actually open up and maybe break skin or so, where the Smith fracture will just kind of like break and kind of smooth itself out in that understanding. Now, that probably does sound a little confusing, but I promise you it's not. It makes sense along the lines once you see a picture, once you understand it. So now moving on to the carpal tunnel syndrome. So there's so many causes that happen in just this syndrome. That's why this is the most common injury in a wrist. It could be hereditary, so it could be passed down from generation to generation, from mom to child to them, for grandparents, moving on throughout all the generations. It can be hereditary. Now, a little fun fact: that actually is running in my genes, so I've taken a very special connection to carpal tunnel surgery. Another cause is excessive hand usage, wrist. That can cause a lot of problems. It's not it's not it's not common, but it's not uncommon at the same time. So excessive hand, wrist movements. It could be from sports. It can be from sitting at a job working on a keyboard. It could be all that stuff. And that kind of relates into the second point of positioning of the hands and wrist. I'm sorry that it was supposed to say hands and wrist, but it just has hands, a wrists. No. So that could also be a factor. Is they make specialized gloves that you can get off the internet when you're working at a desk. They have like this glove that's like full of like these little beads that you can rest your palm of your hand on, and it just kind of like rides and smooths out any problems in the wrist and relaxes the wrist and the hand to do what it needs to do. Another thing is pregnancy. Any health issues, pregnancy, diabetes, all that can cause carpal tunnel syndrome, and that could relate to very temporary, very nonchalant, but um, we'll learn further on that we'll learn that carpal tunnel can get worse if it's not treated properly. So for pregnancy, it might be like a temporary understanding, except like besides like diabetes, that could be an entire thing with diabetes, depending on what type of diabetes you have, because it can happen in both. Rheumatoid arthritis, that's also um, that is something that you can say that is also hereditary. It kind of ties in that hereditary thing. Um, so that could be an issue of something's not going right in your wrist, your thumb, um, muscles in your um, wrist, your thumb, your fingers, your hands. All those muscles can restrict and cause that arthritis. An imbalance in the thyroid glands. So the endocrine system, um, there can be an off balance of that, which can cause a lot of your body to shut down. But mainly in this context of carpal tunnel syndrome, um, the thyroid gland can cause that. Uh, as you can see, carpal tunnel syndrome. And next, and like I said before, there is a connection between the fractures and carpal tunnel. So this is the common ground that these fractures, um, Collins and Smith fractures, can lead to carpal tunnel syndrome, and that's an after effect. Even after everything's gone through the rehabilitation for both these fractures, it could still cause carpal tunnel syndrome. It's bound to happen. It's in a lot of cases um, with any injuries to the wrist, doesn't matter if it's common or uncommon, it will most likely happen in carpal tunnel syndrome or cause carpal tunnel syndrome. So after learning all that, so there is early signs of carpal tunnel syndrome um, that can cause that kind of give warning signs so you can focus on that, and that swelling, inflammation, increase in pressure in the carpal tunnel, and the numbness in the fingers. So the swelling might go around your forearm, your hand, your fingers, like that type of swelling. And you'll see it. It's gonna get puffy. It's gonna be red. Which also can lead into the inflammation of it being like engulfed, feeling like it's engulfed in flames. The increase in pressure, so that can cause a lot of pain of grabbing things, like everyday things, pens, pencils, baseballs, any type of like sports balls, or any common objects of like even keys, steering wheels, which can cause a lot more problems. And the numbness in fingers happen with the nerves and the muscles, like kind of focusing on the pain of the wrist and kind of pulling away from the sensation of the fingers, which can lead to the numbness of fingers. So I'm sorry if you guys get a little queasy around shots, like, um, but that is one of the treatments. So um, we're gonna kind of just stroll past that. But anyway, so treatments down in this process. Like it says at the top, it can get worse if not treated early on. So this one's kind of a like a affiliation. You can kind of self-diagnose yourself, but you need that proper like um adult or not adult doctor verification um on if it is carpal tunnel or not. So treatments down. So there's bracing. There's non. Wow. Sorry. I had a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs that can help with this activity changes. So that's doing more stretches, more exercises, more things with your wrist, your arms, working out, um, giving that kind of like strength training to your wrist. And I know it kind of like sounds weird, but it also helps. It can help in this situation. Nerve guiding exercises, that also can be that guiding into activity changes. Maybe weight loss can help with that. Um, maybe working out the forearms that kind of work with the wrist as well can help. Steroid injections, and those are prescribed. They're not they're starting to kind of like go away, but they do help in this carpal tunnel syndrome injury and all that. So that's just kind of where it's at. Now, this is where you kind of get into the heavy duty stuff. So, because of one of the causes, there could be a problem with the plasma, or that you just need more plasma. So they do rich plasma injections, which kind of induce those shots. Now, there's a lot of shots, there's a lot of splints, there's a lot of bracing, there's a lot of exercise that you can go through. You can even go through physical therapy in the treatment for um, all of these um, all of these injuries, no matter what. In the physical therapy doesn't last very long with the carpal tunnel, depending on if it gets worse. Now, if it does get worse and not treated, it will not go away. There is no treatment for it to go away at all. But if you start early on it, there is no you can't really stop, or you can stop it or at least slow it down just a little bit for that carpal tunnel, which can lead to so many more interesting ways of